All right, so let's dive into something I know you've been wanting to understand better, and that is the recent Ukrainian drone strikes hitting deep inside Russia. We've got a whole stack of news analyses, even some satellite imagery to get through. So buckle up. This isn't just about, explosions. This could actually be a turning point in the war, and we need to figure out why.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This isn't just a, tactical military operation. We're talking about a strategic move that's sending shockwaves through the entire conflict.
Okay, so paint the picture for us when we see reports of over 100 drones involved. That's not some small-scale raid. This was massive. This was coordinated. What was Ukraine going for here?
Well, they were aiming for serious disruption. These drones weren't just poking around the border. They hit 11 different regions across Russia, some targets hundreds of kilometers from Ukraine. So this demonstrates a whole new level of capability and reach.
Yeah, one target that really stood out was the Ryazan Oil Refinery, Russia's largest. And the pictures show huge fires, and we've got firsthand accounts of people panicking as the whole place went up. Why head an oil refinery specifically?
This gets to the heart of Ukraine's strategy. They're going after Russia's ability to finance this war. The Ryazan facility alone produces 5% of Russia's refined oil. Take that offline, and it starts to seriously impact their budget, their ability to import goods, even potentially, fuel social unrest back home.
So it's about more than just blowing things up. It's about hitting Russia's economy where it hurts. And they didn't just stop at oil, did they? There was also the attack on the Kremny L microelectronics plant. I know that translates to Silicon Valley, which sounds pretty important. But what exactly were they making there?
That plant produces components for some of Russia's most sophisticated and dangerous weapon systems. We're talking about the Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missile, the kind of weapon that could carry a nuclear warhead across continents, as well as the Bulava, a submarine-launched ballistic missile that forms a key part of Russia's nuclear deterrent. They were also producing components for the S-300 and S-400 air defense systems, some of the most advanced in the world, designed to shoot down enemy aircraft and missiles. By attacking Kremny L, Ukraine is trying to slow down Russia's ability to produce the very weapons they're using in this war.
So they're hitting the supply chain, trying to starve the Russian war machine. It's like they're playing 3D chess here. And from what I'm reading, it seems to be having a real impact on the battlefield already.
Yeah, a Ukrainian military official claims these attacks have contributed to a nearly 50% reduction in Russian artillery fire. That's a significant change, considering how reliant Russia has been on artillery barrages throughout this conflict. It shows that these strikes, while occurring deep within Russian territory, are having a tangible effect on the front lines.
All right, so Ukraine is punching above its weight, hitting Russia in the pocketbook and on the battlefield. But this isn't happening in a vacuum. We've got all these global power dynamics swirling around the conflict as well. For instance, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. He's calling for a sit-down with Putin to end the war, but at the same time, he's blasting OPEC for not lowering oil prices. What's going on there?
Well, it creates a fascinating and complex dynamic. On the surface, Trump's call for a meeting with Putin seems like a potential step towards de-escalation. However, his criticism of OPEC for not lowering oil prices, which would hurt Russia's oil revenues, aligns perfectly with Ukraine's own strategy.
So on one hand, he's pushing for peace, but on the other hand, he's advocating for economic pressure on Russia. It's a mixed message, to say the least.
It's definitely a mixed message, and it raises questions about his true intentions and the potential for manipulation. Zelensky, for example, has warned that Putin might try to exploit Trump's peace overtures to his advantage.
Okay, so we've got potential peace talks in the air, but also the risk of Russia trying to play everyone. And then there's the whole North Korea angle. Reports suggest they might send more troops to support Russia. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this situation, doesn't it? It feels like we're watching a high-stakes poker game unfold, with each player holding their cards close to the chest.
Yeah, that's an apt comparison. The potential involvement of North Korea introduces a volatile new element into an already tense standoff. If they commit more troops, it could signal a deepening commitment to supporting Russia, which would have ripple effects throughout the region and beyond.
And let's not forget the human cost of all this. We're seeing reports of families being evacuated from Ukrainian regions under constant shelling. There are stories of Ukrainian prisoners of war being executed. It's easy to get caught up in the military strategy and geopolitical maneuvering, but at the end of the day, real people are bearing the brunt of this conflict. Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that behind the headlines and the analysis, there are countless individuals whose lives have been irrevocably altered by this war. The physical destruction is devastating, but the psychological toll on civilians, soldiers, and their families is immeasurable.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that war is never a clean or abstract concept. It's a brutal reality with lasting consequences. So, how does this potential influx of North Korean troops change the equation? Does it tip the scales in Russia's favor?
It's hard to say for sure. While North Korea has a large standing army, their equipment and training are generally considered to be inferior to NATO standards. However, their involvement could provide Russia with much-needed manpower, freeing up their own troops for other operations. It also sends a strong message of support to Russia and a signal of defiance to the West.
And it raises the specter of the conflict widening, potentially drawing in other actors. It's a dangerous game of escalation, and it's hard to predict where it might lead.
We were talking earlier about Trump's call for a meeting with Putin and how Zelensky is concerned about Putin manipulating the situation. What are the chances these peace talks actually happen, and what could they realistically achieve?
Well, the possibility of peace talks is a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. However, the path to negotiation is fraught with obstacles. Trust between the parties is virtually non-existent, and both sides have dug in their heels, demanding concessions that the other seems unwilling to offer.
So it feels like a stalemate with neither side willing to budge.
Yeah.
Is there any historical precedent for this kind of situation? Have we seen this kind of geopolitical deadlock before, and how did it play out? There are certainly historical parallels. The Cold War, for example, was a decades-long period of tension and proxy conflicts between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. There were moments of heightened confrontation, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, but ultimately both sides recognized the catastrophic consequences of direct military conflict and found ways to manage the rivalry without triggering a nuclear war.
So even in the darkest moments of the Cold War, there was a recognition that dialogue, however fraught, was essential to preventing total annihilation.
Precisely. And that's the lesson that's relevant today. The stakes in the current conflict are incredibly high, but the potential consequences of unchecked escalation are even more terrifying.
So what's the most likely scenario here? Do we see a gradual de-escalation with both sides finding a face-saving way to back down? Or do we see a continued spiral of tit-for-tat actions potentially leading to a wider conflict?
Well, it's impossible to predict with certainty, but several scenarios are possible. One scenario is a protracted stalemate, where neither side achieves a decisive victory, and the conflict settles into a grinding war of attrition. This would be a humanitarian disaster with ongoing suffering and displacement in Ukraine and a heavy economic toll on both sides.
And what about the possibility of a negotiated settlement? Is there any hope for a diplomatic solution, or is that just wishful thinking at this point?
A negotiated settlement is the most desirable outcome, but it remains elusive. For negotiations to succeed, both sides would need to make significant compromises, which, given the current level of mistrust and animosity, seems unlikely in the near term.
So we're left with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of what-ifs. It's a bit like staring into a crystal ball trying to decipher the murky images of the future.
That's a good analogy, and it highlights the importance of staying informed, of continuously evaluating the situation as it evolves, and of being prepared for a range of possible outcomes.
All right, so we've laid out the stakes, explored the potential scenarios, and acknowledged the tremendous human cost of this conflict. But there's still one big question looming. What does this all mean for the rest of us, for those of us watching this unfold from a distance?
That's a crucial question. This conflict, while geographically centered in Eastern Europe, has global implications. We're already seeing the impact on energy prices, global supply chains, and international relations.
And the potential involvement of North Korea adds another layer of concern. What are the broader security implications of their actions? Could this destabilize other regions or even draw in additional players?
It's a valid concern. North Korea's willingness to provide military support to Russia could embolden other actors who are looking to challenge the existing world order. It also raises questions about the effectiveness of international sanctions and the ability of the international community to deter rogue states.
So this isn't just a regional conflict, it's a challenge to the entire global security architecture.
Exactly. And it underscores the need for clear-eyed assessments, strategic thinking, and a commitment to upholding international norms and principles.
It's a lot to process, and I'm sure our listener has a lot to think about after hearing all of this. Before we wrap things up, is there anything else you think we should highlight, any key takeaways you want to leave our listener with?
Yeah, it feels like we've just scratched the surface of an incredibly complex and volatile situation. We've gone from drone strikes to oil refineries to nuclear missiles to North Korean troops. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but I think we've done a good job of at least laying out the key elements here for our listener.
I agree. We've highlighted the strategic significance of these drone attacks, their potential to really disrupt Russia's war effort and the complex geopolitical landscape surrounding this whole conflict. Yeah, and we've touched on something that's often overlooked in these kinds of discussions, the human cost of war. The families displaced the lives, lost the scars that will remain long after the fighting stops. It's a stark reminder that these aren't just, abstract geopolitical chess moves. These are real people caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. It's easy to get lost in the analysis, to focus on the military strategies and the political maneuvering. But it's essential to remember that behind every headline, every statistic, there are human stories of suffering and resilience.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about potential scenarios from a grinding stalemate to a negotiated settlement, but it feels like the future hinges on so many unknowns. What should our listener be paying attention to in the coming weeks and months? What are the key indicators that could signal a shift in one direction or another?
Well, there are a few things to watch for. First, keep an eye on the battlefield dynamics. Can Ukraine sustain these deep strikes inside Russia, or will Russia adapt its defenses? Second, pay attention to the diplomatic efforts. Will there be any genuine progress towards negotiations, or will the rhetoric continue to escalate? And finally, monitor the actions of other actors like North Korea and China. Will they deepen their involvement, or will they maintain a more cautious stance?
So basically, stay tuned because this story is far from over. It feels like we're at a crossroads, a pivotal moment where things could go in any number of directions.
That's a great way to put it. We're at a critical juncture, and the choices made in the coming weeks and months will have profound consequences, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for the entire world.
All right, so we've explored the immediate impact of these drone strikes, the potential long-term consequences, and the complex geopolitical web surrounding this conflict. But I want to circle back to something you said earlier, the human cost. What can our listener do from wherever they are in the world to help those affected by this war?
Well, there are several ways to make a difference. Supporting humanitarian organizations working on the ground in Ukraine is crucial. They are providing essential aid to displaced families, medical care to the wounded, and psychological support to those traumatized by the conflict. Donating to these organizations, even a small amount, can have a significant impact.
And beyond financial contributions, what about raising awareness, engaging in conversations about this conflict, and holding our leaders accountable for finding a peaceful resolution?
Absolutely. Speaking out against the violence, amplifying the voices of Ukrainians, and advocating for diplomatic solutions are all important forms of engagement. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such a complex and devastating conflict, but every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a more peaceful future.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I know it's a lot to absorb. But hopefully we've provided our listener with a deeper understanding of the Ukrainian drone strikes, their significance in the broader context of the war and the global implications of this conflict.
And most importantly, we've highlighted the human cost of this war and encouraged our listener to find ways to help to stay informed and to remain engaged in the search for a peaceful resolution.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll continue to follow this story closely and bring you updates as they develop. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay hopeful.